Hello, welcome to Transforming Transportation 2022, brought to you by the World Bank and the World Resources Institute and development partners FIA Foundation. We are halfway through the conference. Let's see what happened on day one.
Mobility is a key part of our lives.
Actually will not solve the problem. Electrification cannot.
Every day,
only
we rely on
electrification
transport.
EV itself actually will not solve the problem. Electrification cannot. Only electrification cannot. It can get us far, but it cannot get us to 90% reduction that we need to meet 1.5 degree goal. We have to fundamentally shift how we move, how we move around in our cities, in our countries.
Transport must be at the heart of our efforts to build a cleaner, safer world.
We are living in a world where transport actually still leaves many people behind and many people underserved.
So it's not just, moving from private cars to bicycle, but what I think is important, again, is to put public transportation and non-motorized transportation in a whole system where you can move from the north part, the south part of the city, west or east, in a way that it's rapidly than when you use the private car, and also more secure.
So two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers must all go electric in the next 4 to 5 years. 5 years should be the period of transition to electric vehicle, and long-distance transportation should all move towards green hydrogen, and that is really the key.
Egypt, while emitting less than 1% of the global emissions, has stepped up to the generational challenge of climate change through bearing the responsibility of hosting COP27, paving the way for the global community to thrive and grow green.
We should keep in mind 5 goals: COVID recovery, economic recovery, climate change, equity, and restoring America's standing in the world. And in the Department of Transportation, we do that with safety as our guiding star.
Innovation has to be applied. It's not innovation if it's not. And so that's the key aspect of this. There'll be failures, there'll be successes, but most importantly, there'll be learning as we go along on this process.
The investment in this decarbonization of the transport sector in Costa Rica can generate a benefit of $43 billion in benefits by 2050, almost doubling the estimated cost of what is the investments that were required.
The mindset has changed. There's leadership and commitment there, and recognizing that if we don't address climate change, it will affect our growth, it will affect our development, it will affect our productivity.
As the climate crisis continues to unfold and make worse by unsustainable transportation systems, we feel strongly that our focus should be less on issuing declarations and more on taking action to mitigate and adapt to the effects of this crisis.
We've just watched some highlights from day one of Transforming Transportation 2022. Let's get busy and make some highlights from day 2. Before I do that, I'm Femi OK. I'm your event guide and MC. I'm going to give you a little tour of the Hop-In platform just very quickly so you can find your way around. Languages that we have interpretation today: English, French and Spanish. If you're on the Hop-In platform, you're on the main stage. If you look just up here, okay, just on top of me, there should be a little word that says translation. Click on that, and then you will see Interprify in letters, and then little red headphones. If you click on translation and click on Interprify, it will say, do you want to mute all of your speakers? The answer is yes, you want to do that. Go onto the click down menu, and then you will find French or Spanish, just those 3 languages, and then you'll be able to hear the whole of this plenary, all of the sessions in that particular language that you selected. That's how you get around. Still to come, oh my goodness, so much. We have 2 big global plenaries to talk about. We have parallel sessions as well. We have a couple of sit-down conversations, which really thematically help position us to what are some of the big topics coming up on day 2 of, let me give you the hashtag, TTDC22, hashtag TTDC22. Also need to tell you, if you're watching a World Bank Live, welcome. Good to see you. If you're watching on the Hopin platform, good to see you too. And the chat is the same. Jump into the chat. Your comments, your questions will be filtered back to me, and hopefully then I can pull them into the conference. So we are having a big conference together rather than me and the plenary speakers speaking to you. We're all having that conversation together. All right, we have a lot today. So I want to do a preview with our co-hosts from WRI and the World Bank Group. So I'm going to say hello to Stientje van Veldhoven. It's so lovely to have you here. And Binyam Reja. It was really good to have you, Binyam. Tag teaming together. But Stientje, first of all, will you tell everybody, we're going to see your title, it's going to pop up on screen, but what you do at WRI. So when you tell us about what's coming up and you frame it from a WRI perspective, we understand where you're coming from.
Yes, and thanks so much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to be here in this opening part together with Ben. And we work together on quite a number of topics. So at WRI, you know that we work really on this crossroad of development and ensuring that we care for this planet and its people in all its different varieties. So now I am working from Europe. I had WRI Europe, the regional office there. Of course, there's a lot of partners in Europe that can help us push the boundaries of knowledge. There's a lot of partners that we may need to partner with to create change across the world. And also, of course, we want to be that bridging function between everything that is learned elsewhere in the world, combining it with the resources that WRI has, and also so to bring this to the European debate. So I'm really at that crossroad to speak the transportation language. And in my former function, I also used to work a lot in transportation, being part of the Dutch government and responsible for transport. And that's also where I met Ben. We were already driving sustainable transport at that time. And it's a great pleasure to be here with you. There is so much that we have to do.
Oh, so much. Hello, Binyam. It's good to see you. If I describe what you did, I would say pretty much everything. But give us your official title so we understand where you're coming from in this particular conversation as we look ahead to the last day of Transforming Transportation 2022.
Great. Thank you, Femi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Binyam Reja. I'm the Acting Global Director for Transport. Under this role, I lead a team of experts and analysts that are working in the global unit of the transport practice that are in charge of where we are working on a number of flagship studies that are to leading the practice into new directions, such as the decarbonization of the transport sector, the electrification of transport, many studies that are going to really chart a pathway for our practice and the World Bank. And as Stientje said, it's really great to be here with you, with WRI and Netherlands government. We've been working quite a lot in the last several years, and the last several months really, on the transportation decarbonization investment series and many related activities. So really excited to be here with Stientje once again on this panel and to speak to you on what the World Bank is doing on this space.
All right. So, Stientje, our overall theme for this conference is climate-centered mobility for a sustainable recovery. But what I feel that we keep going back to is decarbonization of transportation. That is such a big area, such a big topic. And I'm thinking about investment. The plans are there, the ambition is there, But where does the money come from? I'd like your perspective, and I'm going to go to Binyam because Binyam is the economist also, and I really want to hear how he's thinking about this too. But where's the money coming from? How does the money turn up for this very ambitious decarbonisation of transportation?
Well, it depends on what the money is that you're looking for, because if you look at demand for transport, there's always some money for demand for transport, but the question is, where is the money going to go? I think that is the main question, and we can continue to do as we usually did, and then we'll get the same result, which is more motorization, or we can start to invest differently, try to create a different investment pattern, and thereby also attracting or giving more options for actually choices that people can make in their own way of investing in mobility. If you look at the fact that the transport sector globally accounts for nearly 24% of direct CO2 emissions from fuel combustion, and investments are taking place every year, we can do it either right or we can do it wrong. And if we see that, for example, in the US, Secretary Pete Buttigieg is really making a very advanced and comprehensive transportation plan that actually includes the shift to electric, but also putting center and front to revamp mass transportation, then that's a very different kind of investment than when you go, for example, I just came back from Nairobi last week, and there we see massive investments in highways that are actually only designed to attract more cars. So the money is there, but the question is, where's the money going to go? And are we going to stimulate those investments that will get us to a clean transportation future? Or will we just continue on the old road that leads to pollution, climate change, unsafety, and also less access for all those people that cannot afford a safe and clean car?
Binyam, I'm thinking about financing and investment for developing countries. I keep saying in our conference, as the conversations are going on, that the participants from the developing world are saying, but how do we do that? Where does the money come from? Help us out.
Well, first, I have to agree with Stientje that one is we do need to prioritize where we want to invest. I mean, if you continue investing on highways, obviously, as Stientje said, you're going to get the same result as we did. Having said that, there is also quite a lot that needs to be done in terms of generating additional financing, additional revenue to support the decarbonization of transport or to make the transport sector more resilient. We always have to remember that in developing countries, there is still a lot of infrastructure investment that needs to be done, especially in retrofitting existing transportation systems to make them more compatible with low carbon mobility. If you take a highway or a road in an urban area, you will need to reconfigure that to make it usable for cycling, for walking, or to install a dedicated bus lane to make public transport more efficient. So with this kind of needs for investment, so we do need to generate additional revenue. One is obviously countries need to look at what kind of revenue streams they have. For example, making private car owners pay the actual cost they impose on the transportation system, the externalities they cause. Economists like to call this congestion pricing or value pricing. So it's kind of, I think, pricing to make sure that all different modes have an equal footing would be needed. So that tends to generate quite a lot of revenue. Secondly, I think institutions like ours, the World Bank, need also to invest more on low carbon. We have within the World Bank a new climate action plan that actually is calling for increasing climate finance. In the transport sector, actually, we're doing pretty well. So far in FY21, we had 59% of our investment in transport who had what we call climate co-benefits. Basically, most of this money was invested on mitigation and adaptation measures. So there is a lot, I think, that could be done. And then I think finally, we also have to create a structure for the private sector to invest in this kind of aspect. So it's really a whole financing and funding stream that we really need to look at to get this investment going on low carbon transport.
Mm-hmm. Finally, because this is a big build-up to a plenary that's coming up in just a moment, and the other plenaries for today and the parallel session. So I have one last thought I want to share with you. World Resources Institute World Bank Group, Dutch government have been working on recommendations for decarbonisation transportation. Stientje, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's really crucial that we bring all of that together, because there is a choice that we can make. And if we really actively push for a sense of mobility that will actually be accessible to all people, we make such a difference. We make a difference in terms of equity. We make a difference in terms of climate. We can make a difference in terms of road safety. It's not normal that so many people die in traffic. Design of the investments is going to define where this world is going in terms of transportation. So when you design a road, design it for mass transportation and active transport instead of just for cars. Our design will define where transportation is going. And if we keep designing it in the same way we did, we will end up with the same result, where we have a better choice. And also, if you think about the amount of space that people that now use active mobility actually need from these roads, it's so much less than a car. So if you choose active mobility, if you design for road safety, if you design for safe mass transport, you also reduce the overall need for investments if you compare it to when everybody would have a car, which of course will not happen, and which means that we would be ending up with an equity issue next to a climate issue and a road safety issue. So there is a choice to be made, and I hope today and the information from the Transport Decarbonization Investment Series will help to get people to make the right choice for all of us.
Binyam, I'm just about to introduce a video which will tell our audience around the world a little bit more about this series. But before I do, what else do they need to know before they see the video?
Well, I think investment preparation, as you will see on these videos, is really crucial. It's not only about the money, but the planning that has to go into preparing bankable projects, identification of the solutions, and how to package them, how to aggregate them is really crucial. So we need to spend quite a lot of upstream work, and investing on preparing investment projects is, I think, what I really would like to our audience to take with them today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Binyam Raja, Stientje van Veldhoven, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mobility is a key part of our lives. Every day, we rely on transport to access jobs, education, healthcare, and all the other opportunities we need to achieve our full potential. But transport is also a major contributor to climate change, and already accounts for 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are heating the planet. If we don't act quickly, that figure will grow much higher. So how do we keep the world moving while reducing the climate footprint of transport? That is precisely the question that the Transport Decarbonisation Investment Series is looking to answer. Produced jointly by the World Bank, the Netherlands, and the World Resources Institute, the new series provides concrete recommendations for boosting investment in greener transport technologies, such as electric vehicles powered by clean electricity and supported by reliable charging infrastructure, high capacity, high quality public transport, better walking and cycling infrastructure, efficient railways and waterways. To make all this happen, we must work with countries to rethink policies across the entire transport sector. This means making sure countries set specific targets for transport as part of their climate commitments, adapting regulations and incentives, prioritising transport projects with the lowest carbon footprint, managing transport demand more effectively to shift from cars and trucks to cleaner modes, and adopting stricter environmental and safety standards for vehicle fleets around the world. By changing the way we move, we can lower global emissions and create a better future for people and the planet. So join us to act and invest towards better transport.
And now we are heading to Plenary 5, future-proofing transport against crisis. We're going to be focused on resilient mobility, and I will introduce you to the speakers in just a moment. Resilience in mobility is so much more than just infrastructure, as you're about to find out from our three speakers in this plenary. I will greet them warmly and then they will introduce themselves to you. So Mayor Roger Mbassa Ndine, so good to see you. Deputy Prime Minister François Bausch from Luxembourg. It's always good to have you on Transforming Transportation conferences. And also Sheilah, Gaabucayan-Napalang is the Assistant Secretary of Planning and Project Development for the Department of the Philippines. You're going to hear more about their job titles, what they do, what they're bringing to the table now. Mr. Mayor, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Merci de m'accueillir à cette conférence. Je suis Roger Mbassa Ndine, je suis maire de la ville de Douala, élu en mars 2020. Donc ça fait à peu près 2 ans que je suis en poste. La ville de Douala est la principale porte d'entrée du Cameroun. C'est une ville portuaire, à peu près 4 millions d'habitants, et qui est confrontée à un climat de type équatorial, avec une longue saison de pluie et une petite saison sèche, une température moyenne d'à peu près 27 degrés. Donc, c'est une ville qui est au centre, c'est le poumon économique du Cameroun, c'est la ville portière, mais c'est aussi la porte d'entrée de beaucoup de pays en Afrique centrale. Donc, les enjeux économiques sont importants dans cette ville, de 4 millions, parfois même 4 millions et demi, d'après les estimations d'habitants. Et nous pensons que le challenge, la mobilité, les transports est l'un des principaux que nous connaissons dans la ville, à côté des questions d'inondation et à l'épidémie. Voilà ce que je peux dire en quelques mots. Je pourrais évidemment aller plus loin si je peux.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Okay, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. The Deputy Prime Minister of Luxembourg, it is so good to have you. Please introduce yourself to our global audience. Deputy Prime Minister, you are still muted. Have another try. Okay,
can you hear me now?
I hear you. Fantastic.
That's okay.
I hear you now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is François Bausch. I'm Deputy Prime Minister of Luxembourg. I had been in charge for mobility for a long time in my political career, because before being Minister of Mobility and Public Works in 2013, I was, during 8 years before, Vice Mayor of the city of Luxembourg, and they're also in charge for mobility. I'm coming from a country where we have a very high percentage of individual cars, where the mobility problems were very huge and are still today. But since now 2013, we are trying to change the mobility system in general on a very impressive way. So that I think that when we will implement all what we have already decided in the next 8 to 10 years, the mobility must be much better than it were in the past in my country. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. The Assistant Secretary for Planning and Project Development from the Department of Transportation in the Philippines. So nice to have you. Thank you. Please tell us a little bit more about what you do and what you're bringing to the table in this discussion, Sheilah.
Right.
evening from the Philippines. My name is Sheilah Napalang. I'm currently the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Project Development at the Department of Transportation, Philippines. When Femi and I were talking, what I'm bringing to the table is actually something that we need to think about when we think about improving mobility of people. And that is actually developing a transportation system that would be people friendly, that responds to the needs of the users. Just as a background, in 2016, the transport sector was the third largest GHG contributor, following agriculture and energy. Hence, in 2019, the Department of Transportation submitted its unconditional nationally determined contributions, composed of 4 interventions, including 3 public transportation projects and 1 vehicle technology improvement. So that's where we are right now. Thank you, Femi.
I'm thinking about, Sheilah, resilience in mobility, and you come from a region of the world where there are many crises. Sometimes they're natural crises which will impact mobility. Currently experiencing a pandemic, as we are all around the world. How are you dealing with that? How do you plan for that?
That's how do you plan for a pandemic like COVID-19, where people were really not ready for it, right? Well, what we do is pre-disaster, for instance, in a natural disaster. Let's not talk about COVID just yet. But prior to a disaster, what we do is we have information on the routes that people can use, so that when they do evacuation, they know where to use, what routes to use, right? And then, of course, we plan for those as well as where the evacuation centers are, making sure that they're above, for instance, areas where they would be flooded. But the pandemic was another thing, where in March of 2020, the Philippines, at least the head in the National Capital Region, was subjected to a lockdown. And the first to go was public transportation. Right, so people were not able to move around. So what we did as we moved forward was actually, number one, I'd like to just share this with you. Number one, because at that time, passenger demand was very low, we started doing service contracting with our public transport sector, meaning that operators are contracted so that they will run the services, even when there are no passengers. But they will run and they will be paid based on vehicle kilometers. That was one of the things that we did. It was something that responded to the situation. The other thing that we did was to expand our active transport infrastructure facilities, right? Because during the pandemic, we've seen that the trust for public transportation went down. And so people started to use either their private vehicles or their bicycles. So therefore, to encourage people to use bicycles, we started developing infrastructure for active transport, like cycling and walking. That's what we did.
I'm just thinking, Deputy Prime Minister, so much of your work is about being a green politician, anticipating what climate change may well bring. I'm wondering now at this point, what impact climate change is having on Luxembourg, because often we see this impact in the global south rather than the global north. But last year in particular, certainly in Northern Europe, then we started to see a huge impact of climate change, particularly when it came to flooding. What is Luxembourg experiencing, and then how are you handling that?
We can see also in Luxembourg that with climate change, we have much more dramatic climate situations. For example, in the last 5-6 years, we had 3 or 4 times dramatic flooding, and not even, for example, only during winter time, because normally in my country, you have the most wettest time is between, let's say October, November until April, May. But even in the deepest winter, where normally it's more cold. It was in the past more cold with a little snow, but not too much. Today we have winter. The winter is very hot compared to what we had 10, 15, 20 years ago. And a lot of rain, storms and rain. For example, also yesterday again, we had a storm. But we had 3 or 4 times enormously flooding in my country. So, and the population is much more sensibilized also today, also in my country, because 10 years ago, they thought always, climate change that will concern mainly, I don't know, people in Southeast Asia or in Africa, one part because of the droughts, on the other part because of the flooding, but we are in a more temperate climate, and that would not so concern us. But it's really not anymore the case. We have very extreme weather situations in my country. And for the mobility infrastructure, that poses a problem, because the mobility infrastructure had been built in the past mainly with a climate situation that we had over the last centuries. So that changes now also a lot. So now today, when we build new mobility infrastructures, we will much more take care about what we do when we build, for example, and manage much better the risks of flooding that we now have in my country. That was not the case, for example, before. So really, the sensibilization is there. And what we have to do now is not only try to explain the population that the transport sector is a very important sector to decarbonize, and that the behavior of each citizen is important, and that we have to invest, for example, in a new mobility system, but also how we build it in the future. That's very important.
Mayor Ndine, I'm just thinking about how you describe the city that you're mayor of, how important it is economically. So what is the biggest threats that you're facing from climate change? Because that is going to have an impact on the economics. Is it flooding?
Les inondations constituent, sans conteste, l'une des menaces principales auxquelles on fait face. Nous avons eu en 2020 des inondations spectaculaires qui ont résulté de la conjonction des crues, une crue du fleuve Bourri qui traverse la ville, et avec des pluies abondantes. Et du coup, l'activité de transport s'est arrêtée presque pendant toute une journée. Et l'année dernière, nous avons également eu quelques épisodes d'inondation, 2 ou 3, qui étaient moins spectaculaires, mais qui sont présents. Je dois dire que la ville de Douala, comme je l'ai dit, c'est une ville portuaire, une ville qui est située pas très loin, au-dessus du niveau de la mer, ce qui fait que nous avons un problème de drain. Et l'une des priorités que nous avons mises en place a été de définir un schéma directeur d'assainissement. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut construire des drains pour que les drains servent de réservoirs d'eau en cas d'inondation. Malheureusement, nous n'avons aujourd'hui qu'une quarantaine de kilomètres de drains que nous avons pu construire sur un linéaire de drains naturels de près de 250 kilomètres. Vous voyez le chemin qui reste à parcourir, mais au moins les drains principaux ont été construits, les outils ont été construits, et maintenant il s'agit simplement, le challenge, c'est de faire le curage des drains en amont de la saison de pluie, pour que pendant la saison de pluie, ces drains puissent servir de réservoir naturel pour les eaux. Et c'est de cette manière-là que nous pouvons éviter les inondations. C'est un problème crucial, ce n'est pas le seul, mais c'est un problème important pour la ville de Douala.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk climate proofing, speakers. Sheilah, what does that look like in your work? How do you climate proof your transport system?
As I mentioned in the introduction, the transport sector actually is the 3rd largest contributor of GHG. So one of our interventions is to also make our public transportation sector more environment friendly. You see, although our modal share of public transport is 70%, we still have high private vehicle utilization. In fact, a study showed that about our road system, this is a study done in 2014, that the roads are actually occupied, 70% of the road space is actually occupied by private vehicles, right? But which only carries about 25% of passenger trips. So how do we climate proof? By shifting to more sustainable transportation mode. So we have a program called the Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program, which looks at improving fuel efficiency and eventually shifting to electric vehicles as part of the fleet. The second one is we're also looking at, as I've also mentioned earlier, active mobility, active transport, very low emission, but it also moves people around. So we're moving towards these two directions, improving public transportation and active transport.
I'm thinking, Deputy Prime Minister, about the challenges that you have with climate change in Luxembourg, and then thinking ahead, you're anticipating what the other challenges will be, because part of our discussion today is about future proofing, not just what's happening now, but what you anticipate may will happen in the future. I know you've come with some of those solutions, some of those ideas. Can you share them with us, please?
Yeah, we have different approaches. The first one, I think it's the most important one, is to avoid traffic. So what does that mean? That means that we have to reorganize completely our cities, our urban areas, by bringing together again all the functionalities of a city, for example. Today, we have, in fact, the same situation, or nearly the same, that everybody knows from the United States. You are living in one neighborhood, you are working 50 kilometers away in another neighborhood, you are go shopping in another neighborhood. So it's always built in a way that you have to use for everything, very often the car, but you have to be mobile to get to the different functionalities of your daily life needs. So bringing together again is having a better mixture in your neighborhood. For example, creating cities where you can find in your neighborhood many things that you need for your daily needs. The second point is we want to prioritize mobility systems that are first cheap to implement, cheap also to really to build, that are very easy to repair, for example. And for this, cycling infrastructure is for me the best. A cycling infrastructure is very easy to build. It's very easy to repair. Even if you have, for example, floodings, repair a cycling infrastructure is much easier than repair a road infrastructure, and it's much cheaper to have. And then the third point is redesigning our roads. Today, when we have in our mind a road, it's an infrastructure for the car mainly. If you look around the world, everybody says a road, yeah, that's for cars. But no, for me, a road is, in fact, it's some kind of an infrastructure for mobility, where you have to look at what is the best way of mobility that you want to have on this road infrastructure. But it must be there for everybody. So it's not really especially built only for cars, or for cars specifically. You can even have roads without any car, for example. And that's important to understand if you want, for example, also to link this redesign of your roads with the first point that I said, avoiding traffic. And then a last point that we discovered mainly in now also in the pandemic, That's the teleworking. So teleworking took place in an enormous way in the last 2 years. And what I can see now, that people got used to telework, and people got used to see the advantages of teleworking, and even the enterprises they saw in the last 2 years what are the advantages. And if we have a big part of teleworking in our economy, it's clear. Then also you avoid a lot of traffic. You avoid of having the needs for mobility, and it helps you also to be more resilient when you have, for example, natural catastrophes in the future.
Mayor, I'm just thinking about how mayors work. They're very close to citizens, and citizens are very open about telling you what we need. What we need in Douala is this. What are the citizens of your city telling you that they need when it comes to, I know they're not using these words, resilience in mobility. They're probably saying, it takes me this long to get to work, or how can I not get a bus, or why isn't the transport faster? Why is it so expensive? What are your citizens telling you that's helping you decide what you need to do in the future?
Vous avez parfaitement raison. Les citoyens vivent une situation de déséquilibre territorial de la ville. Du fait qu'il y a un cœur de la ville où se concentrent les activités et les autres périphériques, ce qui fait que le problème de mobilité est extrêmement important dans la ville, parce que près de 2 millions de personnes vont des périphéries dans le centre de la ville chaque jour le matin, et chaque soir, ils vont dans le sens inverse. Donc le problème est important. C'est pour ça que nous avons, dans notre approche, nous avons mis en place 2-3 programmes importants qui doivent nous permettre d'améliorer à la fois la résilience et la mobilité à travers le système de transport. Le premier programme, nous avons baptisé Douala ville durable, est un programme qui consiste à mettre en place un réseau de stations de mesure de paramètres hydrométéorologiques qui nous permet de mieux connaître les données locales sur les changements climatiques. C'est important si nous voulons avoir des routes qui durent. C'est important si nous voulons avoir une résilience des moyens, des infrastructures que nous mettons en place. Le deuxième programme, lui, est plus concentré effectivement sur la mobilité. La mobilité à travers le développement d'un transport public de masse. Parce que jusqu'à présent, l'essentiel des transports se fait par véhicules individuels et souvent par des mototaxis. Il y en a 70 à 80 000 dans la seule ville de Douala, ce qui fait évidemment ce qui provoque évidemment des émissions de gaz à effet de serre en nombre important. Donc nous avons un grand projet de transport public de masse par bus, le bus rapide transit, sur le premier projet de 28 km qui nous permettrait de réduire significativement le nombre de véhicules en circulation, qu'il s'agisse des véhicules à 4 roues ou à 2 roues, et par voie de conséquence de réduire également la concentration des gaz à effet de serre dans l'atmosphère de Douala. C'est l'une des principales causes, nous savons tous, du changement climatique. Et nous avons un troisième programme qui est, lui, le projet de développement des villes inclusives et résilientes. Celui-là qui s'adresse à la fois aux infrastructures de transport des routes, mais également aux infrastructures d'assainissement qui permettent aux routes d'être durables. C'est ce projet dont je parlais tout à l'heure qui concerne les trains. La combinaison de ces 3 projets, nous pensons, permettra d'adresser la demande sociale qui émane des citoyens, qui est à la fois une demande de mobilité, une demande de confort dans les transports et une demande de, je dirais, de résilience des infrastructures routières que nous construisons. Cette résilience viendra notamment par les ouvrages d'assainissement, qu'il s'agisse des trains, qu'il s'agisse des caniveaux, qu'il s'agisse d'autres choses. Voilà en fait la démarche de planification que nous avons. Et je suis heureux de pouvoir dire que nous sommes en train d'engager, nous avons déjà engagé les travaux cette année sera pour nous une année cruciale pour adresser ces problèmes et nous espérons en sortir avec une ville transformée.
Deputy Prime Minister Bausch made a note as you were speaking, Mayor, and I'm very curious as to what it was that made him think, aha, let me write this down so I can share it with our audience. Go ahead, Deputy Prime Minister, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't understand your question. Could you repeat the question?
As the Mayor was speaking, you were writing a note. Something he said sparked your interest, okay?
Okay.
So I'm hoping it's on topic. I know you, so I know it's on topic. What did you write down?
Very well. You observed me very well. Yeah. So I wrote here a note saying that we must, if we want to construct or to build a mobility system that is resilient, we must take care about what kind of infrastructure has the biggest impact on the soil, on your natural landscape in general, and which infrastructure has the lowest impact on this. But on the other side, also, is it not so that the infrastructure, for example, has the lowest impact on your landscape or on your soil? Is it not only also this infrastructure that can transport most of the people? So mass transportation, for example. If you look at the impact when you build a highway, for example, we are extending now in Luxembourg one of our main highways, and there the impact is enormously. And just beside this highway, we also build a new network for our railway system. And so you can see it and compare it. What is really the impact on the soil of these two infrastructures? And when I know then that at the end of the day, on the railway network, I can transport much more people during 1 hour, for example, that's compared on this road, because mainly on the road you have in the cars only one people. Then you can see the difference also regarding the impact on nature, and also then the impact at the end of the results of the catastrophes that you have. For example, in the case of floodings due to climate change, because floodings they are happening because you have sealed too much soil in general. Mainly, you have floodings around urban areas. Very, very rare you have floodings where you have a lot of nature, because then nature has organized itself in a way so that normally the infrastructure does not flood. So it's important to see what is my demand of mobility in my country, and what is the best way not only to fulfill this demand and then propose infrastructure, but also what is, from a resilient point of view, then the best way to invest in the infrastructure in your mobility system. So you have always a close link, not only between the transport sector and the carbon footprint that you have already by having mobility via a transport sector, but also on the way how you build it and the impact that it makes for you by using landscape or using nature, for example, that you really seal then, because you have to build on this soil, on this landscape, your infrastructure to have your mobility.
Hello, everybody. How did you manage without me? Sheilah, did you take over and moderate? Sorry about that slight delay. What happened? What did I miss? Go ahead.
You missed my best explanations.
No, and then what happened? Sheilah, I have a question for you from the comment section. I was just going to. Let me just bring it in. It's about electric vehicles. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Let me just find
Okay.
it. And about partnering. Are you partnering with China on electric vehicles, buses, cars, trucks, bikes, and scooters? Are you looking to China to be your partner to help with electrifying a lot of the vehicles that you have in the Philippines? Can you tell us more about that, please?
Right now in the Philippines, as far as electric vehicle is concerned, we have a lot of partners, because we're still doing in the Philippines right now is actually setting the framework for an electric vehicle migration into the system. We have a lot of private electric vehicles, only very few public transport vehicles. So no, we're not just partnering with China. We have a lot of partners. In fact, we're working with several. We have USAID. We're trying to look at how to integrate electric vehicles into the system, because the most equitable way of integrating electric vehicle in the Philippines would have to be through the public transportation sector or the mass transit sector. That will be where it's most effective. That will also be where it would be most impactful on the environment concerns.
This is a question for all of you speakers, and you can take it from different perspectives, because obviously we're talking about 3 different geographical regions. And this is from Amy. How are you all thinking about resiliency in terms of social infrastructure and how that can support resiliency? Deputy Prime Minister, do you want to start with that? And then I'll go to Mary, and then I'll go to Sheilah.
Yeah, that's an important question, because having access to mobility is one of the main problems that we have in many regions in the world. And even in my country, because my country is compared to, maybe if you look at on a world scale, we have a high GDP. So Luxembourg is mainly a rich country, but you have also poor people in this country. We have not everybody is rich in my country, but everybody must have access to mobility, because in our society, without having access to mobility, you are completely really lost. So resilience means also, from a social point of view, giving access to everybody to a qualitative and quantitative mobility system. And that's why, on the one hand, we invest a lot of money in Luxembourg in the public transport system. And on the other hand, also we introduced on the 1st of March 2020, the free public transport, because the free public transport gives everybody the possibility to get this mobility. For me, the free public transport, you must calculate it on a macroeconomic basis to see what it brings to society, and not on a microeconomic basis, for example. And the free public transport in Luxembourg is the guarantee that everybody in my country, no matter if he's rich or poor, has the possibility to go from A to B, to having access to mobility.
What difference did that make to how many people were using public transport?
We saw really a large increase. We had it was a little bit pity, because when we started the free public transport, the pandemic came, so we had lockdowns, so nobody moved around. But immediately the year after, we saw the figures going up again. For example, we also have now in Luxembourg, since 3 or 4 years, a new light rail system in the capital that we introduced 5 years ago. And we saw that the figures that people that are using this light rail, we're breaking records every month nearly since now 1 year, because the daily life has been normalized largely in the year 21. We still were confronted with the pandemic, but not in the same way that in 2020. And now I think that we are nearly on a normal basis again. So the teleworking is going back again to normal. Everybody really tries again to work at his working place. So we really see that it's much more convenient, much more easy to jump in public transport in around the capital. And that's mainly also due to the free public transport.
Mayor, are you thinking about social infrastructure and that helping with the resilience of mobility, those two areas together? Are you thinking about that right now?
Oui, je pense assurément. La mobilité est une exigence fondamentale. Je crois que les citoyens se déplacent tous les jours pour aller au travail, pour aller effectuer un certain nombre d'activités qui leur sont utiles. Et une ville est un ensemble dans lequel à différents endroits, on a des services particuliers qui sont délivrés. Il faut donc que les citoyens puissent se déplacer. Mais il faut que ces réseaux soient, la mobilité permette aux citoyens de se déplacer en sécurité, dans un minimum de confort. Parce qu'à Douala, il fait chaud. Et il faut veiller à ce que les citoyens trouvent dans les nouveaux réseaux de transport public une amélioration non seulement en termes de vitesse, de facilité de déplacement, mais aussi en termes de confort de déplacement, parce qu'il faut qu'il fasse la différence avec les taxis, il faut faire la différence avec les mototaxis, pour que les citoyens aillent davantage vers le transport public de masse. Nous avons le réseau de bus, nous avons également un projet,
If you are an engineer who works in transportation, excuse me, Mayor.
Hello?
If you are yes, I hear you. I'm going to bring up another thought, if I may, Mayor. If you are an engineer who... Please continue.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Yes, I hear you beautifully. I'm stopping so you can speak, and then you're stopping so I can speak. So let me move on, and then I will come back to you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to bring up the topic of engineers who work in transportation systems. Sheilah, are you engineers' biggest fan? I want to be a little bit more controversial.
I am an engineer.
Right.
Sorry,
okay.
I am an engineer.
This is interesting because one of the things that Sheilah told me, which is a little bit on the controversial side, and that is transportation systems, resilience of mobility, it shouldn't be left in the hands of engineers. But you are an engineer, so how did you come to that awareness, that awakening? What was your light bulb moment when you thought, we probably don't have all the answers, even though I studied for a long time? Go ahead.
Because that's true. I mean, engineering is all about the technical part of it. But when you talk about when you talk about the transport system, you talk about people who are going to use it. So therefore, what's most important, of course, the demand is very important if there's really a need for that. But the other important component is how would people perceive, what are the aspirations of people in using public transportation? I was listening to the Deputy Prime Minister. I wish that in the Philippines we could give free public transport rights. That would really be helpful to about 70% of our populace who take public transportation, because that's a modal share of public transportation in the Philippines. Unfortunately, we still don't have that. We don't have that luxury just yet. So, Femi, to answer your question, it's really that. It's really because when you talk about, in fact, I mentioned about the nationally determined contributions that we submitted. Mm-hmm. And we always say that the reduction in GHG emission is really just a co-benefit. What we have submitted in our interventions are really improvement in public transportation, which would be an improvement of experience of the passengers. And I'd like to just add that the way we do it now, it's really not just even about, passengers. We're also looking at passengers with limited mobility. So that's a component. That's a social aspect of it. Not everybody has the same ability. So therefore, we also look at passengers with limited mobility when you look at transport, public transport development. And we also have, part of it would also be women with children, because that's also another aspect of your commuting experience. So that is where I come in. When you talk about transport, you don't talk about the system. You talk about the people who use the system. GHG reduction becomes a reality if we're able to convince people to use the most sustainable mode of transport, or to stay home and just work from home, depending on the work that you do. So it's all about, that's the reason why I said that. We talk about the people who use them, so we can develop infrastructure that would be resilient and responsive to the users.
I'm thinking here because we're talking about future proofing and future crises, and for transportation, what can transportation do to help with those crises? Sheilah, for the Philippines, you have to do this. Go ahead.
We have to make sure that our public transportation system is adequate, it's efficient, and connected. That's another thing that we'd like to look at. And it should also be, like for instance, you have a rail system, but if you have flooding, that becomes difficult if you don't have electricity. So there ought to be viable alternatives to public transportation. So that's what we're trying to do now in the Philippines, right? I did mention that we have infrastructure for active transport, which becomes a viable option for any kind of disaster.
I'm going to bring in the Mayor here. Mayor, I've got a question from Georges, who wants to know about informal public transport and how they suffered during the pandemic. Or did they suffer during the pandemic? And because not all cities closed down, some cities couldn't afford to close down. So the risk of COVID was not as big a risk as losing the economy. So the impact to informal transportation, what have you seen? What do you know in Douala?
Oui, je dois dire que pendant la pandémie, le choix du gouvernement camerounais a été d'éviter un confinement total. Parce qu'en réalité, le mode de vie des habitants, surtout à Douala, ne permettait pas de faire ce confinement. Ici, vous savez, les gens n'ont pas tous des moyens de conservation par le froid, des réfrigérateurs et autres. Donc, les gens vont au marché tous les jours. Et c'est donc impossible de freiner ou de réduire de manière drastique la mobilité. On a dû s'adapter et c'est pour ça que nous avons été à l'avant-garde, par exemple, du port du masque, l'obligation du port du masque. On l'a perçu très tôt comme étant une des solutions. Pour ce qui concerne la mobilité, la pandémie a quand même pesé parce qu'il a fallu tenir compte un peu de risque de transmission, éviter que les gens ne soient trop serrés dans les transports et faire en sorte que les mesures barrières puissent être au minimum respectées. Mais pour ce qui concerne la ville, nous avons surtout vu un développement peut-être un peu plus rapide des moyens de transport privés, les mototaxis et autres, qui ont peut-être l'avantage de ne pas prendre en une seule fois beaucoup de personnes. Et de cette manière-là, on le constate à travers les statistiques, nous avons quand même pu éviter une propagation forte de la pandémie. Le nombre de décès au Cameroun dans l'ensemble est assez limité. Voilà comment nous avons pu gérer la pandémie de la COVID-19 en matière de transport dans la ville de Douala. Maintenant, est-ce que cela est valable pour l'avenir? Je ne pense pas. Je pense que le développement de la ville, l'accroissement démographique dans la ville font que il faut absolument développer des modes de transport, mais si possible, un transport multimodal. On ne peut pas se concentrer sur un seul mode de transport, il faut diversifier et faire en sorte que les habitants puissent aller partout, y compris dans des zones où la qualité du réseau routier n'est pas bonne, y compris dans les zones peut-être d'accès difficile. Il faut trouver des moyens de pouvoir s'y rendre. Malheureusement, Douala est une ville qui n'a pas le même niveau de développement, peut-être que Luxembourg. Nous essayons de trouver avec les moyens de bord comment faire en sorte que cette mobilité soit malgré tout une réalité pour le citoyen moyen de Douala. Voilà ce que je peux dire peut-être par rapport à cela. Le transport public est pour nous la solution pour l'avenir. Mais un transport multimodal.
Deputy Prime Minister Bausch, I have a comment from Jonas, who is watching this plenary right now. Free public transport for all people, accessing opportunity, and it's the comment's moved. Basically, it was free public transport for all people. That was a vote of confidence for you in that. I am wondering if that is such a popular idea. Some of the ideas that Luxembourg is looking at in terms of resilient mobility, are you able to share them with other cities, other places around the world? Are you able to do that, support that outreach, as well as taking care of your own citizens?
Yeah, that's a good question. I must say that the most important thing, if you want to have a more resilient, more sustainable mobility, the most important thing is to invest in the comfort and the quality of the public transport. Only after you can then look at how you organize the tariffication, if it is free, or even if you have, for example, possibilities also to have low fares. But much more important is the comfort and the quality and the offer that you have, the network that you propose. So we focused largely, as we started in 2013 in the government, on extending the offer of the public transport. And then only after came the idea to make the public transport for free. I think that the question that you posed just 10 minutes ago, and asking, do we need more engineers, for example? I say, yes, we need more engineers, but we need more engineers for mobility planification and less engineers for car designing, for example. The problem is that everybody thinks that we could change the mobility and make it more resilient and more sustainable by having some kind of a silver bullet and introducing an electric car or another mode of transport that would be completely revolutionary and new, and that would from one day to another change the situation. That's not the case. You must really question the whole mobility system. Our mobility system is not good. So what I am doing now, what we are doing now, is we are focusing mainly on changing the complete mobility system, and we look to change this on the whole mobility chain. That's what is important. And for that, we need engineers who are really specialized in mobility planning, but mobility planning that we need in the 21st century, like I said, by looking the whole system. So the first thing is to understand that there is no silver bullet. We must really completely question what we did in the last decades. And that's mainly the same situation everywhere. In Africa, for example, it's clear in Africa you have different problems in the cities. You have a completely different situation in the landscape. But I always say, please, Africans, do not the same mistakes that we did in Europe, and really try from the beginning on to build up a good mobility system. And the option that the mayor chose now by saying we are putting a priority in the public transport, it's a good option, because I think that's just the opposite of what we did in Europe.
Really good thought here. And perhaps you can, speakers, you can tell me how you get your information, where you get your advice from. Brendan Finn, in these discussions, we need to include the voices of those who provide the mobility services, both formal and informal, understand their daily realities and understand what the things that they talk about, what they need. I asked the mayor earlier about what are his citizens complaining about. Brendan is saying, what are the transport systems, people who work on them, what do they need? What are they asking for? Sheilah, is that a conversation that you have? Is those discussions that you have inclusive with the people who are actually running the transport systems, on the transport systems?
Hi, Brendan Finn. Thank you for this question, because this is an important consideration. You have to look at the current transport. If you want to plan, you have to look at the current system. And by looking at the current system, you must understand the challenges that are that your operators, your current transport workers are actually facing. So when we do transport planning, we look at the demand of the commuters, right? So I've mentioned, we talk about passengers with limited mobility, but we also look at how the operators, the drivers, because in the Philippines, the operators are different from your drivers. The operators are the ones who own the vehicles, and the drivers, of course, they drive. So it's not necessary that they're the operator or the driver. So you look at the owners of the vehicles or the operators of the vehicles. You also look at the issues of the drivers. In most of the public transportation development that we've done, we hold stakeholder consultations with a lot of the different sectors. We talk to the commuters to find out what they want, or what they need, and what would be their willingness to pay, because that's also part of accessibility. Affordability is also part of accessibility. But then again, we also look at the existing transport service providers. So we would be able to help them transition to this new system. So yes, it is an inclusive discussion, Femi, when we do transport planning.
In the last 3 minutes of our conversation, I have 3 speakers and 3 minutes, so this is perfect. I want to ask you if at the moment you have resilient mobility. Mayor Ndine.
Je pourrais dire facilement que nous sommes en voie. Le choix que nous avons fait de développer les transports en commun, les transports publics de masse, a un autre avantage, c'est qu'il nous permet de réduire le nombre de mototaxis. Or, à Douala, 2 agressions sur 3 se font à travers les conducteurs de mototaxis. Donc, nous adressons là aussi un besoin de la population qui est celui de se mouvoir, mais en toute sécurité et dans le confort, dans un confort amélioré. C'est donc pour nous faisons du pied 2 coups, plusieurs coups, en plus du fait que le transport public permettra de réduire les gaz à effet de serre. Donc, en un seul mot, en une seule phrase, je crois que nous sommes en train d'adresser les besoins fondamentaux de la population, surtout ce besoin aussi de sécurité. Il ne faut pas l'oublier, il y a un besoin de sécurité de la population en matière de mobilité, en matière de transport.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister, in 1 minute, does Luxembourg have resilient mobility?
Clearly no, but we are on the good path. We took the right decisions 8 years ago when we decided to, like I said, completely question our mobility system and developed a new strategy that is based on multimodality. But you can't change a system that went wrong during 50 years in 5 years. I think we are on the good path, but there's still work to do. So it's still work in progress.
And Sheilah.
Just like the Deputy Prime Minister, I would say not yet. But see, the pandemic has actually highlighted how inefficient or inadequate the public transport sector, the transport system is. So therefore, we've learned a lot. But we have also, before the pandemic, we already passed the first ever policy, the National Transport Policy of the Philippines, which actually says that part of the building back better for transport is to actually integrate disaster risk reduction and management in the planning of the transport sector. So, and even before the pandemic, the Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program and our program for improving of public transportation or mass transit option is already our efforts on the part of the Philippines through the Department of Transportation to improve the resilience of the transport sector. So do we have? No, but we're on our way and we recognize the important aspects of options. That's very important. To be resilient, you have options. It has to also respond, it should be responsive to the needs of those who would be using it. And it should actually enable the current transport service providers to transition to the new system.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you speakers for your insights into resilient mobility and future-proofing transport systems for future crises that we may well see. Definitely will see. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you and the comments and questions coming from World Bank Live, from Twitter, and from the Hop-In platform. Listening to this conversation and the many conversations that we have during transforming transportation, we realize that it's so important that we have sustainable transport, use energy efficiently, and those two particular areas we will see coming up in the Lee Shipper Memorial Scholarship Awards, looking at the research, looking at the work that's going in to these very important critical areas. I'm going to hand over to the awards hosts and then tell you that a little bit later on you will be able to see the break, there'll be networking, you'll go to the knowledge exhibition, but now please join the Lee Shipper Memorial Scholarship Award ceremony.
Hello and good afternoon from Vienna. Welcome to the 9th edition of the Lee Shipper Scholarship Award ceremony. My name is Ramon Munoz Raskin. I'm a senior transfer specialist with the World Bank. I'm co-facilitating this session together with Holger Dalkmann. We're supporting on behalf of the Lee Shipper Scholarship Board. What we do in this session is to present the work from selected young researchers, 35 years or younger, that have been awarded the prestigious Lee Shipper Scholarship for their ideas. Some of you may be wondering who Lee Shipper was. Well, he was a very prolific and intellectually provocative member of our global transport community. He was an energizing influence to several generations of us, transport and climate change planners. And very important, Lee was the founder of Embark, which is now the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, and an originator of this Transforming Transportation Conference 20 years ago. When Lee left us in 2011, we felt a huge void as he was an important supporter of young generations. So that is why Holger and I founded the scholarship program and the Transforming Transportation tradition to take a little pause from high-level panels and listen to what the new generations have to say. An opportunity for us all to listen to the voices of those who are coming next to shatter our assumptions. And let's now proceed with our movers and shakers, the winners. They are going to present their research and ideas. One thing is that if you have questions, please use the technical chat, and then the awardees will try to respond after their presentations. And feel also free to provide your contact if you want to discuss with them. Let me also thank the WRI and the World Bank for the support to the scholarship and for providing this venue every year during Transforming Transportation, so that the scholarship can be an integral part of the conference. We want to thank the Volvo Research Educational Foundation and Shell and other donors who have generously contributed to this scholarship. So let's go. Let me introduce our first awardee. Her name is Susan Gichuna from Kenya. She's the first African woman in the history of the scholarship. And she's a researcher and currently a PhD candidate at the Institute of Climate Change and Adaptation in the University of Nairobi. Her research provides evidence on how the lack of climate change resiliency on urban roads is a huge issue in developing countries and supports how we need a rethink to make our cities more climate proof if we care about inclusion. So nice to have you here, Susan. Over to you.
Thank you, Ramon, and greetings from Nairobi. When it rains in Nairobi, it rains cars and money. I used to hear this and I used to wonder what this meant until I joined college and started living in the city more than 10 years now. Flooded roads, bus fare hikes, long queues at the bus stops, and endless traffic congestion best describes a rainy day in Nairobi. In the context of climate change, the intensity and frequency of extreme weather is increasing, and this is worsening existing challenges in our transport system. My research objective, next slide please. My research objective therefore is to establish the effects of weather, that is rainfall and temperature, on urban transport, and this I'm focusing on infrastructure and transport services, and the travel behavior of commuters in terms of their trip making, modal choice, route, and time schedule in Nairobi. But for this presentation, I will focus on the impacts of rainfall on travel behavior of commuters. Next slide. This research, I'm conducting it in Nairobi. Go back, please. The previous slide. I'm conducting this research in Nairobi. It's one of the largest cities and fastest growing in East Africa. It is a capital city of Kenya. And we are using the SCHIPPER scholarship. I've been able to conduct 313 surveys in selected sites in Nairobi. And these are in the low income, middle income, and high income areas. Next slide. I'm looking at the commuter mode of choice, and I asked the respondents what their primary mode of transport for work trips is. And more than half of the respondents say that they use public transport, that is minibuses and buses, which are normally referred to as matatus in Nairobi. And we also have a growing share of motorcycle taxi use in Nairobi. And this could be attributed to the growing, also the industry of motorcycle in Nairobi. Next slide, please. And looking at the effects of rain on trip making, I asked the respondents if they make at all the trip to work when there are rains. And about 28% of them, that's a significant number, said that they have to cancel or their trips to work. And this means that they are excluded from opportunities to access work and to earn a living. And this will also have an effect on their household welfare in terms of provision of their daily needs. Next slide, please. I also asked the respondents if they ever change their mode of transport and their departure time during rains. And a majority of them said that they do not change their mode. And this could be maybe because of a lack of an alternative or an affordability of the alternatives. And a significant share of them, 27%, say that they change the mode. And this could be due to safety concerns, comfort, or cost. Looking at the departure time, almost 3/4 of the respondents said that they have to leave earlier or leave later for their work trips. And this means that there's loss of work hours or income, especially when they have to delay their trip. And longer trips time for if they have to leave to advance their trip. Next slide. In conclusion, therefore, these findings show that there is a lack of resilience to climate impacts for transport systems and the transport users. For example, due to floods and the storms. And this means that the findings also show that a significant number of the respondents are unable to get to work, and those who are able to get to work, they do so at a higher cost or at the expense of their safety. And there is need to improve the resilience of the transport users, and this is by improving the transport system and as well as the public transport services. I acknowledge the SCHIPPER Memorial Scholarship and Global Research and Education Fund for funding my research, and a big thank you to all.
Well, thank you, Susan. Very interesting. I live in Dar es Salaam, and I know exactly what you're talking about, similar challenges. So let's move now to our next awardee, Wei Wei from China. She's a transport PhD candidate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the USA. Her research will examine the demand management strategies to support mass electric vehicle adoption and how to balance renewable energy resources in the power grid for this. So nice to have you here, Wei. Over to you.
Thank you, Revan. Hello from Boston. I'm Wei Wei, and today I will talk about strategies for supporting vehicle electrification with renewable energy resources. Next slide, please. Electric vehicles are promising technology options to decarbonize personal vehicles. Electric vehicles, such as battery electric vehicles, offer a lower life cycle emission intensity at a comparable cost with gasoline internal combustion engine vehicles, even with the current carbon intensity of the grid in the US. Next slide, please. However, questions remain. How can widespread vehicle electrification and increasing integration of renewable energy resources affect grid demand and supply? And how can demand management strategies better match grid demand with supply? Next slide. In this work, I first examined vehicle travel patterns and energy demand in the city of Seattle in the US. I found that residential charging plays a foundational role in meeting vehicle travel demand over time and across the population. Occasional highway fast charging can also address some days with high energy requirements. For example, with a battery electric vehicle that has a 40 kilowatt-hour battery capacity, 14% of the vehicles in Seattle can be electrified with home and work charging, and 41% when adding highway fast charging. Next slide, please. However, charging infrastructure expansion can require expansion of the power grid to accommodate the increased electricity demand. Here, I examine power grid peak demand with charging in two cities, New York and Dallas in the US. I found that delaying home charging and incentivizing work charging are effective at reducing peak demand so that it reduces the power grid capacity expansion needed. Next slide, please. Integration of renewables, in particular solar, may also help address charging peaks, particularly when combined with work charging. Next slide, please. Going forward, I plan to extend the analysis to study vehicle electrification with renewable integration in Indonesia and Denmark. For Indonesia, electrification of motorcycles with solar integration is particularly relevant. For Denmark, wind resources combined with strategic charging infrastructure placement will also be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei. Thank you very much. And now we can proceed with our third awardee, Tamara Kerzner from Israel. And she's a PhD candidate at the Department of City and Regional Planning of the University of California, Berkeley, where Lee worked. Her research will investigate the ways decisions are being made in informal public transport operations. Nice to have you here. Over to you, Tamara. And you're on mute.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Thank you, and good to see you all. I don't see my slides. There we are. So, slide. So this project sort of grew out of work I was doing in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Lubumbashi back in 2014, we were mapping out the minibus routes in the city that had grown very, very fast, doubled in size in just 15, 20 years. And one morning, sort of somebody came into the office and went, oh, we need to go out to this neighborhood. They've started going there now to this sort of new area of new housing. And that sort of immediately raised a whole bunch of questions that were outside the scope of that project of, how was this decision made? Who was the person who decided we're going to drive to this area? We're going to do it now and not a month from now or a month ago. And we're going to drive on this road and not on that road. And as you can see on the map, some locations have quite dense service, some locations have no service at all. So this sort of raised a lot of questions for me about the politics and the economy and the labor relations within this sector and how they related to these kind of decision-making processes. So to sort of summarize the findings of some work I've been doing in Lilongwe in Malawi and in Nairobi in Kenya and in Kampala, Uganda, what's really interesting is that individual vehicles in these sort of atomized, so-called informal transport networks are often competing for passengers on existing routes, and the margins and the working conditions are so limited and so difficult in many cases that taking a whole bunch of risks and having a whole lot of sort of exploratory behavior that would increase coverage throughout the city is really tricky for individual drivers. But in cities like Nairobi, where you find area-based associations and SACCOs, there's sort of competition in between these organizations for space, for new routes across the city in a way that's more considerate of like their entire membership. And so they're able to think the competition here isn't for this passenger at this stop, but for this whole sort of bucket of passengers with these destinations and interests and mobility needs. And they actually support their members and they will cover their operating costs in order to build up new routes in a way that's sort of an individual vehicle that's always kind of neck and neck competition with all the other vehicles that really just mechanically can't do. So that's been sort of a first conclusion to come out of this research project, which the SCHIPPER Scholarship has been supporting. And the way that this moves on to policy implications is to sort of to materialize the full potential of informal transport networks with these assumptions of agility and flexibility and ability to quickly respond to a lot of passenger demands. There actually needs to be more support for the workers and for the operators and recognition and capacity building and investment, financial investment in the internal already existing organizations in the sector, because it's those levels of organization and skill and management that are really supporting the growth of the sector and not just sort of ever more cutthroat, let's say fair competition between ever more vehicles. So that's been the work so far, and we'll hopefully be able to start sort of very small pilots with working together with workers' organizations in the sector to try and improve services and improve the geography of access in Kampala soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was fantastic, wasn't it? So thanks again also to all the three great presentations. And usually also we hand over the certificate in person, but we used to also now to also do everything virtual. So with this, I also would like to hand over also the certificate to all the three scholars. So congratulations again. Fantastic. And we can also do a quick group photo. So hopefully somebody's doing that. Thanks again. And with that, I would like to just share also that we also announce also the next call. So the slide, please. And thanks to the scholars again. And I hope you give them also virtual applause. So with that, if you could show the slide, thank you. So we announce also the next call for application. So if you want to be also the next scholars to present here, please also apply. We will find also in the chat box also further details under the link. But just briefly to talk about the scholarship, we will award up to 3 candidates, a maximum of $10,000 to advance transformative research in efficient and sustainable transport. One of the scholarship will be dedicated to support a researcher from Africa, maybe even also 2. We will also reveal that in time due. So, and 2 additional scholarships will be tendered to scholars with no geographical restrictions. In addition, you will gain access to the Volvo Research and Educational Foundation Network. So applications due March 14th. Please also refer to more details also you see also on the website. I'd like to thank again WI, World Bank, for providing us the opportunity for also this session as every year. Thanks also WeRef also for their support, as well as the board, and also Eileen Kerrigan, Matt Kessler, Jonah Moody, and many others who made us that scholarship possible. And finally, with that, I was asked also by the organizer to highlight that there is now a brief break, but please feel also to reach out also to the scholars, but also use the opportunity to check out the expo booth section before the next round of the technical session, which will start at 9:45 local time. And also to highlight that the final plenary of the day will be here on the main stage at 12:30. So with that, thank you so much. Have a good day, good afternoon, and good evening. And hopefully we will see all of you also in person next year. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.